Yo, bro, strap in. Cause we're about to take a wild ride through the craziest, most unhinged corners of ancient history with this epic stories, ancient insanity. The wildest shit people got up to back in the day. I'm your history buddy, dishing the spiciest, gossip from civilizations that partied harder, loved weirder, and went way darker than anything you'd see today. From Greek symposia that were basically frat raggers with philosophers, to Aztec festivals mixing love with human sacrifice, to Persian palaces where harems and opium fueled the vibe, this saga's got it all. I'm spilling it like we're chilling with a beer. Get ready, man. This is ancient history like you've never heard it before, a no-holds-barred look at how our ancestors got wild. And before we start the saga, please hit the subscribe button and hit that like. I only create these videos for you guys. Now let's dive into the madness. What Greek parties were actually like. Alright, man, picture this. You're in ancient Greece, it's like 400 BCE, and you've just been invited to a symposium. Sounds fancy, right? Like some nerdy philosophy club sipping wine and debating the meaning of life. Nah, bro, these Greek parties were straight up insane. Think frat house meets bacchanal orgy with a side of intellectual flexing. Let me break it down for you, cause what went down at these things would make even the wildest modern rager look tame. So, a symposium was basically an elite boys' night out, held in a rich dude's house in a room called the andron, the men's quarters. Women weren't allowed, except for the hetaira, these super classy courtesans who were basically the life of the party. More on them later. You'd show up, recline on cushy couches, none of this sitting upright nonsense, and get ready for a night of drinking, debauchery, and some seriously unhinged behavior. The Greeks didn't mess around when it came to partying, and they had this whole vibe of go big or go home, mixed with a creepy obsession with beauty, youth, and excess. First off, the wine. Bro, these guys didn't sip their wine like some bougie wine tasting event. They drank it hard. Wine was mixed with water in a big-ass bowl called a crater, but don't think they were diluting it to be responsible. Nah, the mix was like 1:1 or stronger, and they'd chug it from these wide, shallow cups called kylixes. The goal was to keep the buzz going all night without passing out, though plenty of dudes did. They even had a symposiarch, a party master who decided how strong the wine was and kept the chaos organized. Think of him as the DJ and bouncer rolled into one, but with a toga and a serious power trip. Drinking games were next level. Ever heard of katabos? It's the ancient equivalent of beer pong, but way more extra. You'd flick the dregs of your wine cup at a target, like a bronze disc floating in a bowl or a stack of cups, and if you hit, you'd flex like you just nailed a trick shot. Losers had to drink more, and the winner might get a kiss or some other prize from a hetaira. The game got sloppier as the night went on, with wine splashing everywhere and people laughing their asses off. Vase paintings from back then show dudes mid-flick, looking like they're about to fall off their couch. Now, let's talk about the hetaira. These women were not your average escorts. They were educated, witty, and could hold their own in convo with guys like Plato. They'd play music on lyres, dance, and flirt. But let's be real, things got steamy. Symposium art shows these ladies getting cozy, sometimes straight up topless, while the guys are groping or worse. It wasn't just about sex, though. Hetaira were hired to make the vibe electric, like walking into a room and knowing it's about to go down. Some guys got so obsessed they'd blow their inheritance on these women, and poets wrote sappy love songs about them. Meanwhile, regular wives were stuck at home, cause Greek society was hella patriarchal. But it wasn't just hetaira. The Greeks had this whole thing with young dudes, too. Paiderastia, their creepy mentorship system where older guys guided younger ones. At symposia, this got blurry. Older men would flirt with teenage boys, who were often there as wine pourers or entertainers. Vase art shows these boys, barely dressed, getting pawed at while serving drinks. It was normalized back then, but looking at it now, it's straight up disturbing. The Greeks thought it was all about beauty and education, but let's call it what it was. A power trip with some serious ick factor. Then there was the entertainment. Forget Spotify playlists. Symposia had live music, poetry slams, and straight-up performance art. Flute girls, alas players, would wail on these double-reed instruments, hyping the crowd. Dancers would do wild routines, sometimes stripping down or acting out raunchy myths. If the party got really unhinged, they'd bring in acrobats or even phalloi, giant penis props paraded around for laughs. Yeah, bro, the Greeks were obsessed with dicks. You'd see vases with satyrs, half-goat party gods, rocking massive boners, chasing nymphs, and everyone thought it was hilarious. It was like their version of a comedy roast, but X-rated. The convo could get wild, too. These guys loved to one-up each other with deep thoughts, philosophy, politics, love. Socrates was a symposium regular, and Plato's dialogues show him arguing with drunks about the soul while chaos unfolded. But it wasn't all highbrow. They'd play verbal games like riddles, or who can roast who the hardest. If you couldn't keep up, you'd get clowned. Some nights, though, it turned dark, fights broke out, jealous lovers threw hands, or someone got too drunk and started crying about their ex. Vases show dudes puking while others laugh. So clearly, they knew how to push it too far. By the end of the night, the place was trashed. Wine spilled, food scraps everywhere, maybe a few passed-out bodies. The Hittira and boys might slip out with their patrons, while the rest stumbled home or crashed on the floor. Hangovers were brutal. Greek poets whined about them in epic poems. But the next week, they'd do it all again. Symposia were where status, sex, and swagger collided, and the Greeks leaned into it like it was their Olympic sport. So, yeah, man, Greek parties were a mix of epic and unhinged. Wine, sex, creepy vibes, and all. You'd think they were just classy philosophers, but nah, they were raging like there was no tomorrow. Ready for the next chapter? 'Cause ancient history's got way more where that came from. The Roman orgies that shocked even Nero. Alright, man, buckle up, 'cause we're crashing a Roman convivium. The kind of party that makes a Vegas bender look like a kid's birthday bash. Picture Rome, 1st century CE, under emperors like Caligula or Nero, when the elite threw feasts so over the top, they'd leave your jaw on the floor. These weren't just dinners. They were full-on spectacles of gluttony, lust, and straight-up madness that had even the most jaded Romans whispering, "Yo, that was too much." I'm talking sprawling villas, rivers of wine, exotic animals, and hookups so wild they'd make a tabloid blush. Let's dive into what went down when Rome's richest got together to rage. First, the setting. These parties happened in massive triclinia, dining rooms in some senator's or emperor's palace, decked out with marble floors, gold-plated columns, and frescoes of nymphs and satyrs getting freaky. You'd recline on silk-covered couches, propped on one elbow, surrounded by slaves fanning you with peacock feathers. The air's thick with incense, roasted meat, and the musky scent of too many bodies packed in tight. Tables groaned under heaps of food. Think dormice stuffed with pine nuts, flamingo tongues, and whole roasted boars with apples in their mouths. Petronius, this Roman writer dude, describes a feast in his Satyricon where the host, Trimalchio, served dishes sprinkled with gold dust just to flex. Gold dust, bro? Who eats that? The guest list was a mix of Rome's elite, senators, generals, rich merchants, plus some shady characters like poets looking for a patron or courtesans looking for a payday. Emperors like Nero or Caligula might roll through, and when they did, shit got wild. Caligula once threw a party on a bridge over the Tiber, just 'cause he could, with boats full of dancers and musicians floating by. Nero took it further, hosting raegers on artificial lakes with floating brothels. Yeah, you heard that right. Boats where you could pick your company for the night. The vibe was more is more, and nobody did excess like the Romans. Let's talk about the booze, 'cause Romans didn't mess around. Wine flowed like water, poured from massive amphorae into goblets so big you'd need 2 hands. They loved their Falernian wine, aged to a syrupy kick that hit like a chariot. Slaves kept refilling cups, and if you tried to pace yourself, you'd get roasted as a lightweight. Drinking games were brutal. Think Passatella, where you had to chug or get humiliated by the table. Some nights, they'd play Who Can Outdrink the Emperor, which was a losing game when Nero was around. Dude was known to party till dawn, then keep going. Martial, a poet, wrote about guys puking mid-feast just to make room for more wine. Oh, and they had vomitoria, not actual puke rooms, but passages to clear out the drunks who couldn't hack it. Now, the entertainment. Forget a DJ spinning tracks. Romans had live shows that'd make your eyes pop. Flute girls and lyre players set the mood, but it was the dancers who stole the show. These weren't your average performers. They'd do erotic routines, stripping down to nothing but gauzy veils, acting out myths like Venus seducing Mars. Some parties had gladiators sparring for kicks, blood splattering the marble as guests cheered. Caligula once had a lion perform by chasing slaves around the room. Nobody died that time, but it was a power move. Then there were the mimici, actresses who do X-rated skits, sometimes interacting with guests. Suetonius, a gossip-loving historian, says Nero himself jumped into these acts, playing a nymph or a god while the crowd went nuts. But let's get to the real tea, the sex. Bro, Roman orgies were the stuff of legend, and not in a cute way. The convivia had a room called the cubiculum nearby, where guests could slip away for private time. Courtesans, both women and men, were on hand, and the elite didn't care who saw what. Petronius describes Trimalchio's parties where guests openly hooked up on couches, no shame. Same-sex action was common. Romans weren't picky as long as it was consensual, for the elite anyway. But here's the dark side. Slaves and lower-class entertainers often had no choice. Young boys and girls, sometimes barely teens, were brought in as delicacies for the creepiest guests. Suetonius spills that Tiberius had a private island where he trained kids for this shit. Straight up vile. Nero wasn't much better. He'd marry male lovers in public ceremonies, complete with bridal veils and dowries, just to shock everyone. The women at these parties were either high-class courtesans or, sometimes, elite wives pushing boundaries. Unlike Greek parties, Roman women could attend, and some, like Messalina, Claudius' wife, were infamous for their antics. She allegedly snuck out to brothels to compete with prostitutes, racking up clients for clout. Juvenal, another poet, roasted her for it, saying she'd leave parties reeking of sex and still not satisfied. True or not, the rumors show how wild the vibe was. These women weren't just arm candy. They'd match the men drink for drink, flirt, and sometimes outshine them in scandal. Things got weirder when emperors got involved. Nero threw parties called Saturnalia on steroids, where social rules flipped, slaves could insult masters, and everyone went feral. He'd dress as a beast, chasing guests in animal skins for mythical roleplay. Caligula took it darker, forcing senators' wives into hookups to humiliate their husbands. One time, he auctioned off his own sisters as party favors to loyalists. Power dynamics were everything. Sex was a weapon, and the elite wielded it like a gladius. Graffiti from Pompeii backs this up, with brags like, "I screwed half the villa last night," scrawled on walls. Food was another level of crazy. Trimalchio's feast had dishes like a boar stuffed with live birds that flew out when carved. Pure theater. They'd serve peacock eggs, sow's udders, and fish drowned in wine for freshness. Aphrodisiacs were everywhere. Oysters, saffron, even crushed beetle juice. Yep, they thought it was Viagra. If you overate, no worries. They'd hand you a feather to tickle your throat and puke into a bowl. Seneca, a philosopher, griped about people eating till they burst, then starting over. It wasn't just gluttony. It was a status flex to waste food while plebs starved. The nights ended in chaos. Floors slick with wine, broken cups, and spilled sauces. Some guests passed out. Others snuck off to the cubiculum or garden for one last hookup. Fights broke out. Jealous lovers, drunk senators throwing punches, or someone insulting the wrong guy's wife. Nero once set a party on fire, literally, for aesthetic. Slaves cleaned up the mess while the elite staggered home or crashed in piles. Hangovers were epic. Catullus, a poet, wrote poems whining about his splitting head and bad decisions. But the real shock? This was normal for Rome's elite. They'd blow fortunes on one night, then do it again. Pliny the Younger, a chill dude, called these parties a disgrace to humanity, but even he attended. The convivia were where power, sex, and excess collided, and nobody blinked. Graffiti, poems, and histories like Tacitus' annals paint a picture of a society that lived for the next high, no matter how depraved. Even Nero, who once shocked Rome by castrating a boy to marry him, got outdone by his own parties. So, bro, that's the tea on Roman orgies. They were a mix of epic, gross, and straight-up wrong, wine-soaked, sex-crazed, and dripping with power plays. You ready for the next chapter? 'Cause ancient history's got more insanity to unpack. Egypt's Festival of the Pharaohs. All right, man, let's teleport to Thebes, like 1300 BCE, during Egypt's New Kingdom, when the Opet Festival was the biggest party of the year. Think Coachella meets religious pilgrimage, but with way more booze, public hookups, and some seriously unhinged rituals. This wasn't just a festival. It was a 2-week blowout where Egyptians let loose to honor Ammonius, their top god, and the whole city turned into a sweaty, beer-soaked, fertility-fueled frenzy. The Opet was about renewing the pharaoh's divine power, but for regular folks, it was an excuse to get absolutely wild. I'm talking naked dancers, sacred sex, and some creepy royal incest vibes that'll make your skin crawl. Grab a seat, bro, cause this is gonna be a trip. First, picture the scene. Thebes, modern-day Luxor, is buzzing. The Nile's flooding, crops are thriving, and the air smells like lotus flowers, baked mud, and spilled beer. Temples of Karnak and Luxor are decked out with banners, gold statues, and priests chanting hymns. The festival kicks off with a massive procession. Ammonius' golden statue, carried in a boat-shaped shrine, sails down the Nile or gets paraded through the streets on priests' shoulders. Crowds line the banks, screaming, singing, and tossing flowers. Reliefs from Karnak show this in vivid detail. Thousands of people, from farmers to nobles, packed shoulder to shoulder, half of them already drunk by noon. The vibe's electric, like a rock concert mixed with a religious revival. Now the booze. Egyptians love their beer, called Heket, and during Opet, it flowed like the Nile itself. Brewed from barley and dates, it was thick, sweet, and strong enough to knock you out. Papyrus records say they'd haul in vats so big you could drown in them, and everyone, peasants, priests, even kids, got in on it. Herodotus, that Greek gossip king, wrote that Egyptians drank barley wine till they couldn't stand, and Opet was peak chaos. Street vendors slung beer in clay jars, and people chugged it from straws to avoid the gritty bits. Drinking contests were a thing. Tomb paintings show guys stumbling, arms around each other, while others puke in the reeds. One papyrus even mentions a dude betting his sandal he could outdrink his buddy, only to pass out and lose his whole tunic. The food was next level, too. Tables groaned with bread, roasted geese, figs, and honey-soaked cakes. Nobles feasted on ox meat and gazelle, while regular folks munched on onions and lentils. But it wasn't just about eating. Food was an offering to Ammonius, and the excess was insane. Reliefs show piles of bread shaped like animals or phalluses. Yep, the Egyptians were obsessed with fertility. Priests would bless the food, then toss it to the crowd, who'd fight over it like it was Black Friday. Some folks believed eating sacred offerings gave them Ammonius' blessing, so they'd stuff their faces till they couldn't move. Now, let's get to the wild stuff, the dancing and music. Opet wasn't complete without performers, and these weren't your PG-rated troops. Temple reliefs show women in sheer linen dresses, sometimes totally see-through, twirling with sistrums, rattling instruments, and singing hymns to Hathor, the goddess of love and booze. These dancers weren't just eye candy. They were sacred, channeling divine energy. But let's be real, the crowd wasn't thinking about theology. Tomb art shows women stripping down mid-dance, their bodies painted with gold or henna, moving in ways that'd make TikTok blush. Men joined in, too, wearing nothing but kilts or less, leaping and spinning like they were possessed. Music was loud, drums, flutes, and harps cranked to max, hyping the crowd into a frenzy. Then there's the sex, bro, and this is where Opet gets nuts. The festival was all about fertility, making the Nile flood, crops grow, and babies pop out. So sex was front and center. Temples had sacred marriage rituals where priests and priestesses acted out Ammonius and Mut getting it on, sometimes literally. Herodotus claims, and he's a bit dramatic, but still, that women would offer themselves to strangers in the streets as a devotion to Hathor. Picture it, torchlit alleys, couples sneaking off into reed huts, no questions asked. It wasn't just randos, either. Nobles and priests joined in, believing sex during Opet was a divine act. Papyrus records hint at fertility tents, where people hooked up under the gods' watchful eyes. Consent was murky, though. Slaves and lower-class women often got roped into these rites, and it's hard to call that sacred. The creepiest part? The royal incest vibes. The pharaoh, seen as a living god, had to renew his divine power during Opet. Sometimes, this meant symbolic or not so symbolic rituals with his queen, who was often his sister or daughter. Yeah, bro, Egyptian royals were wild about keeping the bloodline pure. Reliefs from Luxor show pharaohs like Amenhotep III cozying up to their sister wives in front of Ammonia's statue, with priests chanting about divine unions. Historians like Manetho note that these rituals could get physical, especially in private temple chambers. It was all framed as holy, but looking back, it's straight up disturbing. The crowd ate it up, though, cheering their god king like he was dropping a new album. Things got darker with the animal stuff. Egyptians worshipped gods in animal form, and Opet sometimes included live bulls or rams, sacred to Ammonius, paraded through the streets. Some rituals had priests uniting with animals in symbolic ways, though texts are vague, thankfully. Tomb art shows dancers mimicking animal moves, and there's evidence of bestiality in myths, like the story of a woman and a sacred bull. It's sketchy as hell, but the Egyptians saw it as divine, not taboo. The crowd would roar, drunk and hyped, tossing offerings at the animals like they were rock stars. The festival wasn't all fun and games, though. Fights broke out, drunk dudes arguing over a girl or a spilled beer. Priests had to keep order, but they were often just as wasted. One papyrus records a brawl where a guy got his nose broken over a dancer, and another describes a noblewoman slapping a servant for disrespecting her during a hookup. The Nile's banks were trashed by the end. Broken jars, trampled reeds, and passed-out partiers. Some folks drowned trying to bathe in the sacred river, and priests had to fish them out. By the final day, the pharaoh would lead a grand ceremony at Luxor Temple, uniting with Ammonius' spirit to renew his divine mandate. The crowd went wild, chanting and tossing lotus flowers. But for most, it was just the last chance to party. Street orgies peaked, with torchlight casting shadows on writhing bodies. Beer vats ran dry, and dancers collapsed from exhaustion. The next morning, hangovers from hell. Tomb inscriptions joke about aching heads and Ammonius' wrath in the form of a pounding migraine. But everyone went home buzzing, bragging about their Opet exploits till next year. Bro, the Opet festival was Egypt's wildest rager, a mix of holy and hedonistic, with beer, sex, and creepy royal rituals. Herodotus called it barbaric, but for Egyptians, it was life. You ready for more ancient insanity? 'Cause we've got plenty left to unpack. The Spartan sex code that broke all rules. All right, man, let's drop into ancient Sparta, around 500 BCE, where life was like a boot camp on steroids, and their sex and marriage rules were so wild they'd make your head spin. Forget flowers and candlelit dinners. Spartans didn't do romance like that. Their whole society was geared toward one thing: building the toughest warriors in Greece. And that meant their approach to love, sex, and family was straight up unhinged. We're talking secret hookups, wife sharing, public nudity, and rituals that'd get you canceled today. This wasn't just about getting freaky. It was state-controlled, military-grade baby-making with a side of creepy power plays. Grab a drink, bro, 'cause this Spartan sex code is gonna blow your mind. First, let's set the scene. Sparta's nestled in the Peloponnese, surrounded by rugged mountains, with mud brick houses and dusty training grounds. No fancy temples or theaters here. Spartans lived lean, all about discipline and war. Men spent most of their lives in barracks, training from age 7 to be killing machines. Women? They weren't locked away like in Athens. Spartan chicks were jacked, trained in wrestling and running, and ran the show at home. Plutarch, this Greek writer, says Sparta was unique, 'cause they treated sex and marriage like a science experiment to breed the strongest kids. And, bro, they didn't mess around. Let's start with marriage, 'cause it was weird. Spartan guys didn't get hitched till their late 20s, but girls were married off as teens, usually to older dudes. Sounds normal for ancient times, right? Nah, the wedding itself was nuts. Picture this. The bride's friends would shave her head bald, dress her in a man's cloak and sandals, and leave her in a dark room to wait. The groom, fresh from his barracks, would sneak in like a ninja, hook up with her, then bounce back to his bunk before dawn. No cuddling, no breakfast in bed. Plutarch says they'd keep this sneaky hookup routine going for months, only meeting in secret. Why? to keep the dude focused on his soldier bros and build anticipation for stronger babies. It's like they turned marriage into a covert op. The sex itself? Purely functional. Spartans believed passion made weak kids, so they kept it quick and clinical, like a CrossFit workout. Xenophon, another Greek writer, says couples were supposed to be sober and in prime condition to maximize baby quality. No wine-soaked romance here. Think more like a scheduled gym session. But don't think it was boring. The secrecy added a thrill, and tomb inscriptions hint that some couples got way into the cat-and-mouse game, sneaking extra meetups in barns or olive groves. One Spartan poem, quoted by Athenaeus, even brags about a guy conquering his bride like a fortress. Spicy, but also kinda intense. Now, here's where it gets wilder. Wife sharing. Yeah, bro, Spartans were cool with lending out their wives. If a dude was old or couldn't have kids, he might share his wife with a younger, fitter guy to produce a strong heir. Plutarch spills the tea, saying it was no big deal. Spartans saw kids as community property, raised by the state to be warriors. Sometimes, a wife would have kids with multiple guys, and everyone was chill. Lycurgus, Sparta's legendary lawgiver, supposedly set this up to keep the population strong. Imagine a council of elders going, "Yo, your wife's hot. Let's get her with Aegis for some prime DNA." It's like a dystopian Tinder for super soldiers. But it wasn't just dudes making the call. Spartan women had serious clout. They owned land, ran households, and could initiate these arrangements. Aristophanes, an Athenian playwright, jokes that Spartan women were so bold they'd pick their studs like horses. One story from Herodotus tells of a noblewoman, Gorgo, who straight up told her husband to share her with a war hero to strengthen the bloodline. She wasn't shy, and neither were her sisters in arms. Women would flaunt their status by dedicating statues to Aphrodite, bragging about their contributions to Sparta's future. It was polyandry with a side of patriotism, and it shocked the rest of Greece. Let's talk nudity, 'cause Spartans loved it. Both men and women trained in the buff, and it wasn't just for practicality. Young guys ran drills naked, their oiled-up bodies gleaming in the sun, while girls raced and wrestled in skimpy tunics, or nothing at all. Plutarch says this was to inspire desire and toughen them up. Festivals like the Gymnopedia were basically nude dance-offs, with teens showing off their moves to drums and flutes. Older Spartans watched, scouting for marriage matches like it was a draft combine. Vase art from the time, borrowed from Athens, 'cause Spartans didn't do art, shows ripped dudes and girls mid-leap, no shame. Athenians thought it was scandalous, but Spartans were like, why hide perfection? This nudity had a dark side, though. The agoge, Sparta's brutal training system, paired young boys with older mentors in a creepy guidance setup called paiderastia. Like in Athens, it often got sexual. Older warriors would teach teens about war and life, and inscriptions hint at hookups during training camps. It was framed as bonding, but let's be real. A 30-year-old dude with a 15-year-old student is sketchy as hell. Girls weren't spared. Either, some sources, like Pausanias, mention female mentors initiating teens in rituals to Artemis, though details are vague. The power dynamics were messed up, and consent was barely a concept. Then there were the fertility rites. Spartans worshipped gods like Artemis and Apollo, and their festivals were lit. The Hyacinthia festival had 3 days of feasting, music, and what Plutarch calls sacred unions. Couples would hook up in fields or sacred groves, believing it pleased the gods and boosted crops. Priests led chants, and dancers acted out myths. Think satyrs chasing nymphs, but with real people. Some rituals got freaky, like the phallophoria, where they paraded giant wooden dicks through the streets, singing raunchy songs. One surviving hymn, quoted by Hesychius, goes on about planting seeds in every sense. The whole town got involved, from kids tossing flowers to elders cheering like it was a Super Bowl. Spartan women were the real MVPs here. They didn't just pop out babies. They were trained to be tough as nails. Girls ran races, threw javelins, and wrestled, all to prep their bodies for childbirth. Xenophon says they were fed better than most Greek women, 'cause weak moms made weak warriors. They'd taunt guys during festivals, singing songs like, "You're no man if you can't catch me." Tomb reliefs show women mid-sprint, kilts flying, with dudes chasing them like it's a rom-com. But it wasn't all fun. Childbirth was brutal, and Spartan moms were expected to shrug off losing kids, saying he wasn't strong enough for Sparta. Cold as ice. The downside? Sparta's obsession with perfection was harsh. Babies deemed unfit were left on Mount Taygetus to die, per Plutarch. Couples who didn't produce kids faced shame, and barren women were mocked in public. Men who dodged marriage got fined or paraded naked through town while women sang insults. One dude, named in a lost text by Ephorus, got so fed up he defected to Athens. And the constant hookups led to drama, jealousy, fights, even murders. A story from Pausanias tells of a warrior killing his rival over a shared wife, only to be exiled. Sparta's sex code kept the state strong, but it tore hearts apart. By the end of a Spartan's life, they'd seen it all: secret weddings, nude races, wife swaps, and raunchy festivals. Hangovers from Hyacinthia mead were legendary, and scars from wrestling or mentorship were badges of honor. Sparta's sex rules shocked Greece. Aristotle griped that their women were too bold, and Athenians called them barbarians. But Spartans didn't care. They built an army that crushed rivals like Persia, and their freaky traditions were the secret sauce. Bro, this was a society where love was war, and sex was strategy. Ready for the next chapter? 'Cause ancient history's got more where that came from. Babylon's Temple of Love. Alright, man, let's teleport to Babylon, around 1800 BCE, in the heart of Mesopotamia, where the Euphrates River sparkles and the city's alive with noise, spice, and sin. Babylon was the Vegas of the ancient world, glitzy, excessive, and a little dangerous. Their goddess Ishtar, queen of love, war, and fertility, ruled the vibe, and her temples were ground zero for some of the wildest, most scandalous rituals ever. The Opet festival in Egypt was a rager, but Babylon's festivals for Ishtar took things to another level. Think sacred prostitutes, drunken crowds, and rituals so freaky they shocked even the Greeks. Herodotus, that chatty Greek historian, called it barbaric, but for Babylonians, it was just Tuesday. This is the story of how sex became a divine act, and, bro, it's gonna get wild. Picture Babylon's skyline, massive mud brick ziggurats towering over palm-lined streets, with the Ishtar Gate's blue-glazed lions gleaming in the sun. The air smells like incense, roasted barley, and sweat from packed crowds. Ishtar's temple, the Iana, is the main stage, a sprawling complex with courtyards, altars, and shadowy chambers where the magic and madness happens. Cuneiform tablets, like those from Hammurabi's time, describe the temple as a hub of worship, but it wasn't just prayers and offerings. Ishtar was the goddess of love in every sense, and her festivals, especially the Akitu New Year Bash, turned the city into a hedonistic playground where sex was as holy as sacrifice. Let's start with the setup. The Akitu festival, held in spring, was Babylon's biggest party, lasting 12 days to celebrate the harvest and renew the king's divine mandate. Crowds flooded the streets, from farmers to nobles, all hyped to honor Ishtar. The festival kicked off with a procession. Priests carried Ishtar's statue, draped in gold and lapis lazuli, through the city to a sacred barge on the Euphrates. Reliefs from Nineveh show the scene. Musicians banging drums, blowing trumpets, and shaking sistrums, while dancers in skimpy linen twirled and chanted. The crowd was already buzzed on Sakuru, a thick, date-flavored beer that hit like a sledgehammer. Clay tablets list vats of it distributed free, with scribes noting the people drank until the stars danced. Bro, they weren't kidding. The food was insane, too. Tables overflowed with barley cakes, roasted lamb, pomegranates, and honey-drenched figs. Priests blessed the spread, offering chunks to Ishtar's altar before the crowd dove in. Some dishes were shaped like breasts or phalluses. Yep, Babylonians were obsessed with fertility symbols. One cuneiform recipe describes a cake called kamanu, baked with aphrodisiacs like saffron and crushed herbs believed to stir the loins. People ate till they couldn't move, then kept going. 'Cause wasting food was a sin, but overindulging? That was divine. Street vendors hawked grilled fish and sesame buns, and kids ran around snatching scraps, adding to the chaos. Now, the real tea, the sacred sex. Ishtar's temple was famous for its Natatu priestesses, women dedicated to the goddess who, according to Herodotus, had to offer themselves to strangers as a rite of passage. He says every Babylonian woman did this once in her life, sitting in the temple courtyard until a man tossed a coin in her lap and took her to a chamber for a holy act. Sounds sketchy, right? Modern historians think Herodotus might have exaggerated, but cuneiform tablets confirm Kadishta women, sacred prostitutes, were a big deal. These weren't low-class escorts. They were educated, respected, and seen as Ishtar's avatars. They'd sing, dance, and, yeah, hook up with worshippers, all to channel the goddess fertility. Temple records list their services alongside offerings like goats or grain, and the coin wasn't just payment. It was a donation to Ishtar. The Akitu turned this up to 11. The festival had a sacred marriage ritual where the king, or a high priest, would unite, with a priestess playing Ishtar to renew the land's fertility. Clay tablets from Uruk describe a chamber atop the ziggurat, draped in silks, where this went down. Was it symbolic or actual sex? Probably both, depending on the king. One text brags about a ruler pleasing the goddess for 3 nights, and the crowd outside chanted hymns like, "Fill the womb of the earth." Meanwhile, regular folks got in on the action. Courtyards turned into hookup central, with couples sneaking in to reed huts or temple alcoves. Herodotus claims you could hear moans over the drums, and nobody batted an eye. It was all for Ishtar. But here's the dark side. Bro consent wasn't always clear. Slaves and lower-class women were often forced into these rites, dressed up as devotees to please nobles or foreign traders. Cuneiform laws from Hammurabi's code mention punishments for women who refused the goddess, which is code for not playing along. Men weren't spared, either. Young guys, sometimes teens, served as temple attendants and got roped into rituals with older priests or patrons. A tablet from Sapar hints at boys offered to wealthy donors, framed as a blessing. It's creepy as hell, and the power dynamics were straight-up exploitative. The elite got off on the divine excuse, while others had no choice. The entertainment was wild, too. Dancers, male and female, performed in next to nothing. Think beaded belts and not much else. Reliefs show them twisting into erotic poses, mimicking Ishtar's myths, like her seduction of Tammuz. Musicians played lyres and double pipes, hyping the crowd into a frenzy. Some nights, they'd act out raunchy stories, with actors simulating, or not simulating, sex on stage. One tablet describes a skit where a priestess tames a lion, Ishtar's animal, with suggestive moves that had the crowd roaring. They'd also parade phallic statues, some as tall as a man, painted red and gold. People tossed flowers or poured beer on them, singing songs like, "Rise, Seed of Life." It was half worship, half party game. Things got weirder with animal stuff. Ishtar was linked to lions, and rituals sometimes included live ones, caged or chained, roaring as priests chanted. Some myths hint at bestiality. Tablets mention women honoring sacred animals, though details are fuzzy, and thank the gods for that. It was rare, but enough to creep out even the Babylonians, who wrote laws banning it outside temples. Still, the crowd loved the spectacle, cheering as dancers mimicked animal moves or priests sprinkled lion blood on altars. It was all about fertility, but it's hard to unsee the ick factor. Fights broke out, too. Drunk dudes argued over priestesses or spilled Sakaro. One tablet records a brawl where a merchant stabbed a rival over a stolen natatu, only to get exiled. Women weren't shy, either. Texts mention priestesses slapping men who got too handsy. The streets were a mess by day 3, broken jars, trampled offerings, and passed out partiers. Some folks drowned in the Euphrates trying to bathe for Ishtar, and priests had to drag them out. Hangovers were brutal. A scribe named Anasir, yeah, that shady copper guy, griped in a letter about his head splitting like a clay pot after a Akitu. By the festival's end, the king's marriage to Ishtar wrapped things up. Crowds gathered at the ziggurat, chanting as he emerged, supposedly glowing with divine power. The party didn't stop, though. Last night hookups were legendary, with torchlit orgies in the temple's shadow. When the sun rose, Babylon was trashed, but everyone went home buzzing, bragging about their offerings to Ishtar. The Eanna temple's coffers were stuffed with coins, and the city's birth rate spiked 9 months later. Herodotus might have called it shameful, but for Babylonians, it was holy chaos. Bro, Babylon's temple of love was a wild mix of devotion and debauchery, sex as worship, beer as fuel, and rituals that'd make your jaw drop. You ready for more ancient insanity? 'Cause this saga's got plenty left to unpack. The Viking blood feasts. All right, man, let's sail to Scandinavia, around 900 CE, deep in the Viking Age, where life was raw, brutal, and freezing. The Norse were badass, raiding, trading, and worshipping gods like Odin and Freya with a ferocity that scared the crap out of Europe. Their blots, these sacred feasts, weren't just cozy dinners with mead. They were full-on blood-soaked, booze-fueled, sex-charged spectacles that mixed worship with total chaos. Think heavy metal concert meets horror movie, with animal guts, shamanic trances, and hookups that'd make your head spin. Ibn Fadlan, an Arab traveler, saw one and basically said, "These guys are insane." Bro, he wasn't wrong. Let's dive into what went down when Vikings threw a blot. Picture a winter blot in a Norwegian fjord. Snow's piling up outside, but inside a massive longhouse, it's sweltering. The hall's built from oak, its walls carved with snarling dragons and runes, smoky from a roaring central fire. The air reeks of pine, sweat, and blood from sacrifices already underway. Chieftains, warriors, and farmers pack the benches, their faces lit by flickering torches. Women, just as fierce, sit among them. Vikings didn't lock their ladies away like some cultures. Skalds, poet-bards, strum lyres, chanting sagas about Thor's smashing giants, while thralls, slaves, haul in barrels of mead. The Edda poems and sagas like Inglinga give us the tea, and archaeological finds, like blood-stained altars, back it up. This ain't a chill potluck, it's a holy rager. First, the sacrifices. Blots were all about pleasing the gods with blood, and Vikings didn't skimp. Outside, priests called Gwa led the ritual at a hof, temple, or sacred grove. They'd slaughter horses, pigs, or goats, slitting throats with a ceremonial knife, while chanting to Odin for victory or Freya for fertility. Blood sprayed into bowls, and the Gwa splashed it on altars, warriors, and even the crowd, who cheered like it was a touchdown. Adam of Bremen, a Christian monk, wrote about a Uppsala blot where 9 animals, and sometimes humans, were hung in trees, their corpses swaying for days. Human sacrifice was rare but real. Ibn Fadlan saw a slave girl offered to join her dead master, and we'll get to that creepy shit later. The carcasses were roasted, and the smell of charred meat filled the hall, mixing with mead and smoke. The booze was next level. Mead, brewed from honey, was the drink of choice, sweet, potent, and served in massive horns you couldn't put down without chugging. One horn could hold a liter, and refusing a refill was a bitch move. Skaldskaparmal describes warriors draining horns till they saw Valhalla. They also had OL, a barley beer, and some drank jor, a fruity brew that hit like wine. Drinking games were brutal. Think Bragaful, where you'd swear an oath, like raiding England, then chug to seal it. Losers got mocked or worse. Sagas mention guys puking mid-feast, only to rally and keep drinking. One Heimskringla story tells of a chieftain, Olaf, who got so wasted he fell into a fire pit and lived to brag about it. Food was a flex too. Tables groaned with roasted horse, sacred to Freyr, boar, and fish, plus barley porridge, berries, and bread baked in ashes. They'd slather everything with butter or honey, 'cause Vikings loved rich eats. Havamal advises not to overeat, but at a blot, nobody listened. They'd tear into meat with knives, tossing bones to dogs prowling the hall. Some dishes had ritual vibes, like boar's heads served with apples to honor Freyr, god of fertility. Thralls kept plates piled, but if you were low status, you might just get gruel. Feasting wasn't just about hunger. It was showing off wealth and pleasing the gods. Now, the entertainment. Forget Netflix. Vikings had skalds spitting epic poems about battles and gods, their voices rising over the din. Drummers pounded hides, and bone flutes wailed, setting a primal vibe. Dancers, often women or young warriors, moved in furs or linen, mimicking wolves or ravens, Odin's animals. Some performances got raunchy. Sagas hint at skits where dancers acted out Freya's myths, like her trading favors for a necklace. The crowd roared, tossing silver rings, or insults. At big blots, they'd have wrestling matches or knife games, blood splattering the straw floor. One Jal saga scene describes a guy losing a finger in a drunken brawl, only to laugh it off. Let's get to the sex, bro. Cause this is where blots went wild. Vikings were chill about sex, marriage was flexible, and hookups were no big deal. Freya, goddess of love, was worshipped with fertility rites that got steamy. After sacrifices, couples would slip into the shadows of the longhouse or nearby barns, believing sex pleased the gods and boosted crops. Voluspa mentions sacred unions during feasts, and archaeological finds, like phallic amulets, show fertility was huge. Women had clout. They could initiate hookups or divorce if their man sucked. Sagas like Laxdala tell of women like Gudrun seducing warriors at feasts, no shame. But it wasn't all consensual fun. Thralls, especially women, were often forced into serving guests. Ibn Fadlan's account of a Rus Viking funeral, close cousins to Norse, is grim. A slave girl was drugged, gang-raped by warriors, then killed to join her master in death. It was framed as a ritual, but it's straight-up horrifying. At blots, thrall women were passed around, their duty to honor the gods. Men weren't spared. Young male thralls or captives sometimes entertained chieftains. Gesta Danorum hints at boys offered to please Odin, and it's as creepy as it sounds. The elites saw it as divine, but for the victims, it was hell. Then there's the seer magic, which took things to another level. Seer was shamanic sorcery, often led by women called vulvas. They'd enter trances, drumming and chanting, to commune with spirits. Some blots had seer sex rituals. Eirik Saga describes a vulva uniting with a warrior to channel Freya's power. It was half spiritual, half orgy, with the crowd watching, hyped. Men who practiced seer were mocked as unmanly, but sagas like Lokasenna show Loki accusing Odin of it. So it happened. These rituals could get trippy. Archaeologists found henbane seeds, a hallucinogen, in Viking graves, suggesting drug-fueled trances amped up the vibe. Fights were inevitable. Drunk warriors, mead horns flying, and egos clashing led to chaos. Egil's saga tells of a blot where a guy got his skull cracked over a woman, and the chieftain had to step in. Women through hands, too. Greta's saga mentions a wife stabbing a guest who groped her. The longhouse floor was slick with spilled mead, blood, and vomit by night's end. Some dudes passed out, others kept raging till dawn. Hangovers were brutal. Havamal warns about Mead's revenge, and skalds wrote odes to their pounding heads. The creepiest part? Human sacrifices. At big blots, like Uppsala's every 9 years, they'd offer people, usually thralls or captives, to Odin. Adam of Bremen describes bodies hung in a grove, dogs and horses beside men. Ibn Fadlan's funeral account details a girl strangled and stabbed after the ritual rape, her body burned with her master's ship. It was rare at smaller blots, but the threat hung over every thrall. The crowd saw it as a gift to the gods, cheering as blood soaked the altar. Bro, it's chilling. By the feast's end, the chieftain led a final toast, swearing oaths for raids or harvests. The hall was trashed, bones, broken horns, and passed-out warriors. Thralls cleaned up while survivors staggered into the snow, bragging about their conquests in bed or brawl. The gods were pleased, the mead was gone, and the Vikings were ready for another season of chaos. Blots were their way of spitting in death's face, and they did it with blood, sex, and swagger. Bro, Viking blood feasts were a gory, sexy, sacred mess. Worship wrapped in violence and excess. You ready for more ancient insanity? This saga's got plenty more to unpack. India's tantric temples gone wild. Alright, man, let's teleport to ancient India, around 1000 CE, during the Chundala dynasty in the heart of Madhya Pradesh. We're in Khajuraho, where temples covered in jaw-dropping erotic carvings stand like a testament to a time when spirituality and sex were two sides of the same coin. Tantra, a mystical practice blending Hindu and Buddhist vibes, wasn't just about meditation. It was a full-on sensory explosion that turned temples into playgrounds for the divine. These weren't quiet prayer sessions. They were wild, incense-choked, mantra-fueled rituals where priests, royals, and devotees got freaky to reach nirvana. The Kama Sutra was circulating, Temple art was NSFW central, and festivals like Holi or Shivaratri turned the vibe into a sacred rager. Let's dive into what went down when India's tantric temples went all out, bro. Picture Khajuraho's skyline. Dozens of sandstone temples, their spires piercing the sky, every inch carved with gods, nymphs, and couples in positions that'd make your eyes pop. The air's thick with jasmine incense, burning ghee, and the musky sweat of packed crowds. The Lakshmana temple, dedicated to Vishnu, is ground zero, its walls plastered with sculptures of group sex, acrobatic hookups, and even some questionable animal action. These aren't just art. They're a guide to Tantra's core belief, uniting body and soul to transcend the mortal world. Texts like the Tantra Loka by Abhinavagupta and the Vijayanabhara of Tantra lay it out. Sex, when done right, was a fast track to the divine. And, bro, they meant business. The big event? Festivals like Shivaratri, honoring Shiva, the god of destruction and creation, whose lingam, yep, a giant stone phallus, was the star of the show. Crowds gathered at temples, chanting mantras like Om Namah Shivaya, while priests poured milk, honey, and ghee over the lingam. The vibe was electric, drums pounding, bells clanging, and devotees swaying in a trance. Holi, the spring festival, was even wilder, with colored powders flying and bang, cannabis-laced drinks, loosening everyone up. The Bhagavata Purana describes Holi as a time when all shame vanished, and temple courtyards turned into a rainbow-streaked party of dance, song, and, yeah, hookups. Let's talk food and drink, cause tantric feasts were no joke. Tables groaned with rice, lentils, and sweets like laddu soaked in saffron and rosewater. Meat was rare, but not off limits. Tantric texts like the Kala mention goat or fish offered to Kali, then eaten by devotees. The real kicker was bang, a cannabis paste mixed into milk or sweets that sent people into a giggly, euphoric haze. Charaka Samhita, an ancient medical text, calls it a liberator of the mind, and at festivals, folks downed it like shots. One 11th century poem describes a Holi where men and women, drunk on bang, danced as one with the gods. Add in soma, a mysterious ritual drink, maybe a hallucinogen, and you had a crowd ready to lose it. Now, the entertainment. Tantric rituals had music and dance that'd blow your mind. Natya Shastra, a text on performance, describes dancers called devadasis, temple women trained in seductive moves to honor the gods. They'd swirl in silk saris, barely clinging to their hips, their anklets jingling as they acted out Krishna's flirty myths with the gopis, milkmaids. Temple reliefs show them in poses straight out of the Kama Sutra, surrounded by musicians playing sitars, flutes, and mridangam drums. The crowd wasn't just watching, they were feeling it, chanting mantras to sync their souls with the rhythm. Some dances got explicit, with devadasis mimicking sex acts as a divine offering. It wasn't porn, it was spiritual, but, bro, it was steamy. Here's the wild part. Tantric sex rituals, or Maithuna. Tantra taught that controlled sex could channel divine energy, uniting Shiva's masculine force with Shakti's feminine power. Priests and initiates, often royals or elite devotees, would gather in temple chambers, lit by flickering oil lamps, to practice Maithuna. The Kalarnava Tantra lays it out. Couples, guided by a guru, would meditate, chant, and then get physical, aiming for ecstasy without climax to trap the energy. Sounds intense, right? But it wasn't just one-on-one. Khajuraho's carvings show group scenes, 3, 4, or more people tangled up, sometimes with priests overseeing like it's a yoga class. It was all about transcendence, but let's be real, it looked like an orgy. The devadasis were key. These women, married to the temple, were skilled in dance, music, and, yeah, sex. They'd join rituals, pairing with devotees or priests to serve the gods. Inscriptions from the Chola dynasty list devadasis as temple VIPs, paid in gold and land. But it wasn't all glamorous. Some were forced into it, especially lower caste girls dedicated by families. Consent was murky. A devadasi couldn't say no if the temple demanded it. Male devotees weren't spared. Young boys, trained as temple attendants, sometimes joined rituals, and texts like the Skanda Purana hint at them pleasing elders. It's creepy, and the power dynamics were straight-up exploitative. Festivals like Holi took Maithuna public. Bang-fueled crowds would dance in the streets, some stripping down as powders flew. The Mahabharata mentions couples sneaking into temple gardens or riverbanks, believing sex during Holi pleased Krishna. Temple art shows it all, men and women, men and men, even group scenes, carved in stone like a divine porn flick. One Khajuraho panel has 8 bodies intertwined, and historians still argue if it's symbolic or a real party. Either way, the crowd ate it up, chanting and tossing marigolds. Priests kept things holy, but by night 3, it was chaos. People hooking up in alleys, under trees, or right in the temple courtyard. The creepy stuff? Some tantric sects, like the Kaula or Agori, pushed boundaries. They'd use impure elements, blood, alcohol, even human remains, in rituals to break taboos. A Tantrasara text describes a rite where initiates drank from skulls and smeared ash from cremations to conquer death. Sex was part of it, too, sometimes in graveyards, to channel Kali's wild energy. Animal sacrifices were common. Goats or roosters beheaded on altars, their blood mixed with wine for devotees to sip. One carving shows a priestess with a severed head, mid-ritual, while couples go at it nearby. It's metal as hell, but also chilling. Fights broke out, too. Bang made people bold, and temple records mention brawls over Devadasis or stolen soma. One inscription from a Chola temple describes a noble punching a rival who insulted his ritual partner. Women weren't shy. Devadasis were known to slap overzealous devotees. The temple grounds were trashed by the end. Sandalwood ash, crushed flowers, and spilled bang everywhere. Some folks passed out, others kept dancing till dawn. Hangovers were brutal. A poet from the period moaned about Shiva's wrath, pounding his skull after Shivaratri. By the festival's end, priests led a final ritual, offering the lingam one last bath of milk and honey. The crowd, exhausted but buzzing, chanted mantras as the sun rose. Temples like Khajuraho stood as proof of Tantra's power, art and sex merging to touch the divine. The Kama Sutra and Aninga Ranga weren't just manuals. They were scripture, guiding devotees to ecstasy. Other Indians, like the Orthodox Brahmins, called it depraved, but for Tantric followers, it was the ultimate worship. Bro, India's Tantric temples were a wild mix of sacred and scandalous, sex as salvation, art as arousal, and rituals that'd make your jaw drop. You ready for more ancient insanity? This saga's got plenty left to unpack. The Celtic sex magic rites. Alright, man, let's teleport to ancient Britain or Gaul, around 300 BCE, in the heart of the Celtic world. These folks were fierce, tattooed warriors, mystic druids, and tribes who lived for war, feasting, and worshipping gods like Cernunnos, the horned god of fertility, and Epona, the horse goddess. Their festivals, especially Beltane in spring, were no chill picnics. They were full-on, mead-soaked, fire-lit, sex-charged rituals that blended magic and mayhem. The Romans, like Tacitus and Julius Caesar, wrote about these rites with a mix of awe and what the hell vibes, calling them barbaric. But for the Celts, this was how you honored the gods, boosted crops, and kept the tribe strong. Bro, these blot-style feasts were wild. Think blood, booze, and hookups in sacred groves. Let's dive into what went down when the Celts got their magic on. Picture a hilltop in what's now Ireland or Wales, just as spring wakes the land. It's Beltane, May 1st, and the air's crisp, smelling of wet grass, blooming hawthorn, and smoke from massive bonfires. The tribes gathered in a clearing ringed by oaks, their branches hung with mistletoe. A huge fire blazes, sparks flying like stars, while druids in white robes chant in a tongue that sends shivers down your spine. The crowd, warriors with woad-painted faces, women in flowing tunics, even kids, sways to the beat of high drums and bone flutes. Stone circles or wooden nematons, sacred groves, set the stage, and archaeological finds, like the Gundestrup cauldron, show horned gods and ritual scenes that scream party time. This ain't a church service, it's a primal rager. First, the rituals. Beltane was about fertility, making crops grow, animals breed, and babies pop out. So everything revolved around life and lust. Druids led the charge, herding cattle between two bonfires to purify them, as Pliny the Elder describes. But it wasn't just cows getting blessed. People jumped over flames or ran naked through smoke, believing it brought luck and virility. Tacitus mentions warriors offering blood, sometimes their own, sometimes from a sacrificed boar or stag, sprinkling it on altars or the crowd. The Mabinogion, a Welsh myth collection, hints at human sacrifices in darker times, like prisoners or volunteers given to Cernunnos. Graves with skulls and charred bones back this up, though it was rare. The blood-soaked vibes set the tone. This was about life, death, and everything in between. The booze was next level. Celts loved their korma, a honeyed ale that hit like a warhammer. Barrels of it, brewed in clay vats, were hauled in, and everyone drank from wooden cups or shared horns. Caesar, in his Gallic Wars, says the Celts drank till they dropped, and Beltane was no exception. Drinking games were brutal. Think pass the horn, where you chugged or got mocked as weak. Leber Gabala Rin, an Irish text, describes warriors betting weapons or lovers on who could drink more. Some passed out in the grass, others puked and kept going. Women matched men, with tales of chieftains' wives out drinking rivals. One story from a lost Irish saga mentions a woman, Medb, draining a cauldron to win a bet, then leading a raid. Badass. Food was a feast for the gods. Tables, or just hides on the ground, groaned with roasted boar, venison, and salmon, plus barley cakes and early greens. Dinshenkas, a text on Irish places, describes Beltane feasts with meat piled high as hills. They'd offer chunks to the fire for the gods, then dive in, tearing meat with knives or hands. Some dishes had ritual vibes, like bread shaped like phalluses or breasts for fertility. Thralls, slaves, served, but even they got scraps, cause Beltane was about unity. The smell of roasted meat, mead, and burning would fill the air, and dogs fought over bones underfoot. It was a messy, glorious free-for-all. Now, the entertainment. Druids and bards were the rock stars, chanting tales of gods like Luff or the Dagda, whose giant club, yep, a dick metaphor, was a crowd pleaser. Tain Boquelnge mentions bards singing of heroes betting goddesses, hyping the crowd. Dancers, often women or young warriors, moved in furs or linen, their bodies painted with spirals. Some dances were straight-up erotic, mimicking mating animals or myths like Cernunnos chasing nymphs. The Undisturbed cauldron shows a horned figure surrounded by writhing figures, and archaeologists think it's a Beltane scene. Drunk warriors would join in, leaping over fires or wrestling naked to show off. One Roman source, Dio Cassius, says the Celts danced till they collapsed, like beasts in heat. Here's the wild part, the sex magic. Beltane was all about fertility, and sex was the main event. Celts believed coupling during the festival pleased the gods and ensured bountiful harvests. Leber na Hwedra hints at sacred unions in groves, where couples hooked up under druid supervision. It wasn't just married folks, singles, warriors, even priests got in on it. Women had serious clout. They could choose partners or refuse without shame. The Ulster cycle tells of women like Machu seducing warriors at feasts, no strings attached. Crowds would gather in clearings, torchlit and buzzing, with couples slipping into the woods or behind standing stones. It was public but sacred, like a holy orgy. Druids amped it with cedar-like magic, similar to Viking shamans. They'd chant, burn herbs like mugwort, a mild hallucinogen, and lead trance rituals. Some couples performed Maithuna-style acts, guided by druids to channel divine energy, like Indian Tantra. Historia Britannia mentions fire rites, where naked dancers circled flames, pairing off as the crowd chanted. Phallic amulets, found in Celtic graves, were worn for luck, and women tossed them into fires for fertility. It wasn't all consensual, though. Thralls and captives were often forced into sacred roles. Caesar notes slave girls offered to warriors, and it's grim. The elite saw it as divine, but for the powerless, it was exploitation. The creepiest part? Some rituals got dark. Druids occasionally demanded blood beyond animals. Tacitus describes a Boudicca-led rite where Roman captives were given to the goddess Andraste, possibly raped then killed. Bog bodies, like the Lindau man, show signs of ritual murder, strangled, or throats cut, maybe during blots. Sex and death were linked. One Irish myth tells of a woman mating with a warrior before his sacrifice to carry his strength to the gods. It's chilling, and the crowd's cheers for blood and lust make it worse. Fights were common. Mead-fueled warriors clashed over women or insults. Taine describes a brawl where a chieftain lost an eye over a dancer. Women threw hands, too. Cath Mage Twyard mentions a priestess breaking a rival's nose. The clearing was trashed by night's end, spilled korma, broken cups, and blood from fights or sacrifices. Some passed out in the firelight, others kept raging. Hangovers were brutal. A Celtic poem laments the hammer of Mead, splitting skulls. Druids closed with a final chant, driving cattle through fires again as the sun rose. Beltane was the Celts' way of spitting in winter's face, blending sex, magic, and blood to keep the world spinning. Romans like Pliny called it savage, but for Celts, it was life. Bro, these rites were a primal, sacred mess. Fire, lust, and gods in one wild package. You ready for more ancient insanity? This saga's got plenty left to unpack. The Persian pleasure palaces. All right, man, let's teleport to Persepolis, around 480 BCE, in the heart of the Achaemenid Persian Empire, where kings ruled half the known world and partied like gods. These dudes, think Darius, Xerxes, or Artaxerxes, didn't just throw dinners. They threw convivia on steroids, feasts so over the top, they made Greek symposia look like a backyard barbecue. Their palaces were dripping with gold, and their banquets were a mix of feasting, flirting, and freaky power moves that shocked even the Greeks. Herodotus, Xenophon, and cuneiform tablets spill the tea, and reliefs from Persepolis show the vibe. Kings on thrones, surrounded by dancers, wine, and entertainers of every kind. Bro, these pleasure palaces were a wild ride of luxury and debauchery. Let's dive in. Picture the scene. You're in the Apadana, Persepolis Grand Audience Hall, its cedar roof held up by columns carved with bulls and lotuses. The air's thick with myrrh incense, roasted lamb, and the sweet tang of date wine. Gold and silver torches cast flickering light on walls inlaid with lapis lazuli, while silk curtains sway in the breeze. The king lounges on a golden throne, draped in purple robes, his beard curled to perfection. Around him, nobles, generals, and foreign envoys recline on cushioned divans, fanned by peacock feathers. Reliefs show hundreds of guests, Medes, Babylonians, even Greeks, bringing tribute like leopards or jars of saffron. The Persepolis fortification tablets list feasts hosting thousands, with enough food and wine to feed a city. This ain't a party, it's a flex of imperial power. First, the food. Persian banquets were a buffet of insanity. Tables groaned with roasted ox, gazelle, and ostrich, plus exotic stuff like camel hump or peacock stuffed with dates. Athenaeus quotes Polyaenus describing a feast with 15,000 guests, where they served 1,000 animals a day, lambs, goats, even lions for the king's table. Bread came in 100 varieties, baked with sesame or honey. Desserts were next level. Think pistachio cakes, fig paste, and pomegranates drizzled with rose water. They'd sprinkle saffron or gold dust on dishes just to show off. Slaves, servants, kept plates piled, scurrying between kitchens and tables. If you couldn't keep up, you were a lightweight, and nobles would clown you in front of the king. The booze was unreal. Persians loved their wine, imported from Shiraz or the Levant, served in golden rhytons shaped like griffins or rams. Herodotus says they drank without limit, and Xenophon's Cyropedia describes nobles chugging from horns so big you needed two hands. They'd mix wine with opium or herbs for an extra kick, and bang-like drinks, cannabis-infused, borrowed from India, got the vibe trippy. Drinking games were a power move. Kings like Xerxes would challenge guests to match him cup for cup, and refusing was a career ender. Esther in the Hebrew Bible hints at a week-long feast where no one was compelled to drink, but come on, peer pressure was real. Vomit was common. Plutarch mentions wine-soaked floors and nobles passing out mid-toast. Now, the entertainment. Forget a Spotify playlist. Persians had live bands with harps, flutes, and santur, hammered dulcimers, setting the mood. Dancers, often from conquered lands like Lydia or India, swirled in sheer silks, their moves so seductive they'd make TikTok blush. Reliefs show women with kohl-lined eyes, twisting into poses that screamed, "Look at me." Some performed myths, like Anahita, the love goddess, seducing heroes. Others did acrobatics, juggling fire or balancing on ropes. Ctesias describes a banquet where a Bactrian dancer stripped naked mid-act, and the crowd lost it. For extra flair, kings like Darius brought in tamed cheetahs or parrots, just cause they could. One time, Xerxes had a Greek wrestler fight a lion for laughs. Spoiler, the lion won. Here's the wild part: the sex. Persian kings had harems, and these weren't just side chicks. The Persepolis tablets list hundreds of concubines living in royal complexes, from princesses to captives. At banquets, they'd mingle, serving wine or dancing before slipping off with guests. Herodotus tells of royal entertainers who'd grace nobles' couches, and it wasn't just for show. Sex was a diplomatic tool. Kings gifted concubines to seal alliances, like when Xerxes sent a dancer to a Median general. It was all smiles, but the women had little say. Some were high status, like the king's secondary wives, but others were slaves, forced to perform. Esther hints at virgins prepared for the king's bed, and it's as creepy as it sounds. Girls groomed for months before a one-night audition. The harem wasn't just for the king. Nobles brought their own favorites, and banquets turned into hookup hubs. Xenophon describes rooms off the main hall where couples, or groups, slipped away. Reliefs from Susa show curtained alcoves, and Ctesias mentions pleasure chambers with silk beds and opium pipes. Same-sex action was common. Persian nobles, like Greeks, weren't picky, and young male attendants often doubled as companions. The Avesta, a Zoroastrian text, frowns on it, but banquet stories say it happened anyway. One tale from Athenaeus describes a prince sharing his lover with a guest, all to curry favor. It was open, shameless, and part of the game. The creepy stuff? Eunuchs and coercion. Eunuchs, castrated men, guarded harems and sometimes joined the entertainment. Ctesias says they were prized for their loyalty, but it's grim: boys mutilated to serve the king's whims. Concubines, especially captives, had no real choice. Herodotus tells of Greek women taken after battles, forced into harems, and gifted at banquets. Some resisted. One story from Plutarch describes a Thracian girl stabbing a noble who got too handsy, only to be executed. The king laughed it off, but it shows the dark side. Sex was power, and the powerless paid the price. Royal women stirred drama, too. Queens like Atossa or Amestris weren't just arm candy. They played the game. Herodotus spills about Amestris demanding a rival's breasts be cut off. Yep, that happened, to keep her spot as top wife. They'd join banquets, flirting or scheming to boost their son's claim to the throne. Esther paints Vashti defying Euxurus, maybe Xerxes, at a feast, refusing to parade for drunk nobles. She got banished, but it shows women had some spine, even in a man's world. Concubines, though, were pawns. Ctesias mentions one poisoned for displeasing a guest. Fights broke out, too. Wine and egos don't mix, and Persian feasts were no exception. Xenophon describes a banquet where two satraps drew swords over a dancer, blood spilling on the marble. Women weren't shy. Queens slapped servants, and concubines clawed rivals. The Persepolis tablets list guards breaking up brawls, and one time, a drunk noble set a tapestry on fire, nearly torching the palace. By night's end, the hall was trashed: spilled wine, broken rhytons, and vomit-soaked rugs. Some passed out, others kept hooking up in alcoves. Hangovers were epic. A Greek envoy, quoted by Athenaeus, moaned about Persian poison in his skull the next day. The king wrapped things with a toast, gifting gold to loyalists or favors to favorites. The crowd cheered, half drunk, as he retired to his harem. Persepolis was left buzzing, with nobles bragging about their conquests, on the battlefield or in bed. The Greeks called it decadent, but for Persians, it was empire. Bro, these pleasure palaces were a wild mix of luxury, lust, and power plays, golden excess with a dark edge. You ready for more ancient insanity? This saga's got plenty left to unpack. The Aztecs' bloody love fests. Alright, man, let's drop into Tenochtitlan around 1450 CE, in the heart of the Aztec Empire, where life was a high-stakes dance between gods, war, and sacrifice. These folks were next level, building floating cities, conquering neighbors, and worshipping gods like Zacapili, the flower prince of love and ecstasy, with rituals that'd make your blood run cold. Their festivals, especially the Akpanitli or Tlacaxipualisli, weren't just religious gigs. They were full-on, pulque-soaked, blood-drenched, sex-fueled spectacles that mixed devotion with debauchery. Spanish chroniclers like Bernardino de Sahagun and Diego Duran wrote about them with a mix of shock and fascination, and codices like the Florentine Codex paint a vivid picture. Bro, these bloody love fests were a wild ride of gore and passion. Let's dive in. Picture the scene. Tenochtitlan's Great Plaza, surrounded by the Templo Mayor's twin pyramids, their steps stained dark with blood. It's Akpanitli, a harvest festival for Tosi, the Earth Mother, and the air's thick with copal incense, roasting maize, and the coppery tang of sacrifice. Torches flicker, casting shadows on stone carvings of serpents and skulls. The crowd, nobles in feathered cloaks, warriors with jaguar pelts, and farmers in loincloths, packs the plaza, chanting to flutes and thundering tepanasli drums. Women, their hair braided with flowers, sway with ayal rattles, their faces painted red with cochineal. Codices show thousands gathered, some already buzzed on pulque, a milky agave booze. This ain't a Sunday service, it's a sacred rager. First, the sacrifices. Aztecs believed gods needed blood to keep the sun moving and festivals delivered. Priests, faces black with soot, led victims, usually war captives, to the pyramid's summit. The Florentine Codex describes hearts ripped out with obsidian knives, blood splashing into bowls or down stone steps. Bodies were flung to the crowd below, sometimes carved up for ritual meals. Tlacaxipualisli, honoring Zype Totec, was grim. Victims were flayed, and priests wore their skins like suits, dancing for days. Sahagun says the crowd cheered, seeing it as divine, but it's chilling. Hundreds died at big fests, their skulls racked on Tsimpantli poles. Animal sacrifices, like quails or dogs, added to the gore, their blood mixed with maize for offerings. The booze was intense. Pulque, sacred to Mayahule, was thick, sour, and strong enough to floor you. Nobles sipped it from painted gourds, while commoners chugged from clay jars. Codex Mendoza lists vats hauled in for festivals, enough to drown a village. Drinking was ritual. Priests toasted gods before anyone else, but it got sloppy fast. Duran describes warriors embracing the earth, aka passing out, mid-chant. Drinking games, like betting cacao beans on who could drain a gourd fastest, led to laughs or fights. Women drank, too, despite rules. Codex Borgia shows priestesses sneaking pulque, their eyes glassy. Some fests had tiananacatl, psilocybin mushrooms, reserved for shamans or nobles, sending them into visions of Zacapili's flower world. Food was a feast for gods and men. Stalls overflowed with tamales, turkey, and atole, maize porridge, spiked with honey or chili. Codex Magliabecchiano mentions tsoali, dough figures of gods, eaten as communion. Nobles got fancy, iguana, fish with cacao sauce, or dog stew. Yep, they ate pups. Commoners munched beans and squash, but everyone gorged. Food was offered to altars first, smeared with blood or flowers. The smell of roasted maize, chili smoke, and blood hung heavy, and kids darted through, snatching tamale scraps. It was a chaotic, communal binge, tying the tribe to the gods. Now, the entertainment. Music and dance were the heartbeat. Priests blew conch shells, rattled chickawasli sticks, and pounded drums, their rhythm shaking the plaza. Dancers, painted with ochre or black, wore feathers, bells, and barely their loincloths. Codex Borbonicus shows women as flower maidens, twirling with marigolds, their moves mimicking Zacapili's myths of love and ecstasy. Men danced as warriors or gods, leaping with macaw plumes. Some performances got steamy. Sahagun describes dances where couples entwined like vines, acting out fertility myths. The crowd joined in, swaying or stomping, some tripping on pulque or mushrooms. For kicks, they'd stage mock battles, warriors clashing with obsidian clubs, blood real but honorary. Here's the wild part, the love fests. Zakapili, god of flowers, love, and pleasure, was worshipped with sex as devotion. Okpanitli had fertility rites where couples hooked up to honor Tosi and ensure harvests. Codex Vaticanus hints at sacred unions in temple courtyards or reed huts by Lake Texcoco. Priests oversaw, chanting to flutes, as couples believed their acts fed the earth. It wasn't just married folks, young warriors and maidens, chosen for their beauty, paired off. Historia de los Mexicanos says women could pick partners, a rare flex, but nobles often arranged matches. The vibe was public but holy, torchlight casting shadows on writhing bodies. Shamans cranked it with rituals. They'd burn yatli, a psychoactive herb, or eat mushrooms, entering trances to commune with Zakapili. Codex Tellurianoremensis describes priests guiding couples in Tlacahuilo, a love dance that ended in hookups to bloom like flowers. Some rites were tantric-like, with controlled breathing to channel energy. But it wasn't all free love. Captives, especially women, were forced into sacred roles. Sahagan tells of prisoners married to warriors before sacrifice, drugged with pulque or cacao. It's grim. Consent was a myth for the powerless. Male captives or teens sometimes served priests, and codices hint at it with veiled terms like offering the flower. Creepy as hell. The darkest part? Sacrifice and sex intertwined. Tlacaxipualisli had victims wed to priestesses before death, their blood sealing the union. Codex Lod shows a woman dancing with a captive, then watching his heart get yanked out. Some festivals had exiptla, people dressed as gods, treated like royalty, then killed. Women playing Tlazolteotl, goddess of lust, were loved by priests before their end. Duran calls it diabolic, but Aztecs saw it as cosmic balance. The crowd roared, high on pulque and gore, tossing marigolds at blood-soaked altars. Fights broke out, too. Pulque made warriors rowdy, and codices mention brawls over women or